Good evening to all and welcome to Byju's IAS. I am Basavaraj. So this will be the last session of disaster management, right? So we have completed 5 days of disaster management. So this will be the last session of disaster management. So just confirm that I am audible as well as visible to you all. Good evening. Good evening to all. Just confirm that I am audible as well as visible to you all so that we can start the today's class. Done. Am I audible as well as visible? Just confirm that. Okay. Am I audible and visible to you all? Perfect. Perfect. Done. So we made an effort in understanding a good number of disasters and also their measures to be taken to mitigate them or to reduce their and man-made disasters they can be avoided. And after that we made an effort in understanding the evolution of disaster management in the international parameters. And there we discussed something called as the Sendai framework. Now you should remember that Sendai framework will be from 2015 to 2030, and this Sendai framework consists of 7 goals and 4 priorities. 7 goals and 4 priorities, and we discussed the 7 goals. In that 7 goals, 3 goals has to be reduced. That is deaths, injuries, economic losses, and loss to critical infrastructure. And 3 goals are there which have to be improved. That is bringing the countries in the purview of Sendai framework, making more contribution from the developed countries to the developing countries, and improve in the early warning system. So these are something which we refer them as the 7 goals, right? And 4 priorities also we discussed. Now, if you take the Sendai framework, it is referred as integrated disaster management, or we say it is integrated disaster management or governance. Integrated disaster management or governance. I told you that it includes both risk as well as the crisis. So this is what we discussed yesterday. It includes the aspect of pre-disaster management and also the post-disaster management, including at the time of disaster as well. So this is integrated part. Now we'll try to understand the disaster management with reference to India, how the disaster management got evolved in India. Now during 1990s, there were many disasters were there. Take an example of the cyclone in Odisha, earthquake in Gujarat. Then we also had an incidence of landslides. And this landslide was very devastating, which took place in Milpa, Uttarakhand. And here, all these types of disasters, they were responsible for huge losses. Huge losses. Losses in terms of deaths, injuries, and socioeconomic losses. So here we find there were huge losses. Why losses were there? Because there was lack of coordination and integration. There was no coordination between different ministries. There was no coordination between the different forces. So hence, huge losses were there in terms of deaths, injuries, socioeconomic losses. And that is where government recognized that it is important that we should have a disaster management as national priority. And that is where they set up a high-powered committee. HPC means high-powered committee. High-powered committee. Under J.C. Pant and National Committee after the Gujarat earthquake. So committees were set up. Now the major objectives of these committees, they were set up for, first one, to make recommendation on preparation of disaster management plan. To make recommendation on preparation of disaster management plan. So that was the first part, to make recommendation on preparation of disaster management plan for India. And also suggest the mitigative measures to that. Also to suggest mitigation measures. That is how to reduce that. And this committee, they studied all the parameters. And based on the recommendations of that, based on their recommendation, the government of India set up a disaster management cell under Ministry of Agriculture. But later, in the year 2002, this disaster management was transferred from Ministry of Agriculture to Ministry of Home Affairs. Later, it was transferred to Ministry of Home Affairs. Ministry of Home Affairs. Right. So at present, the disaster management is under Ministry of Home Affairs. Is that clear? Then we have made a setup of disaster management. It needed finance. It needed certain structures. And that is where in the 10th 5-year plan, a detailed chapter on disaster management was prepared. So this is for the first time in the 10th 5-year plan. A separate chapter was created for disaster management, defining its roles, defining its responsibilities. After that, in the 12th Finance Commission, it was mandated to review financial arrangement for disaster management. It means provide financial arrangement in the context of disaster management. So slowly we started a cell in agriculture, then we moved on to Ministry of Home Affairs. Then in the 10th plan, a separate chapter was there. And in the 12th plan, financial review was there. And then a paradigm shift, a major turn was in the year 2005, where we made an act. Which is referred as National Disaster Management Act. Very important one. An act was formed. 2005, National Disaster Management Act. After that, we created a policy in the year 2009. We will see what is the policy later, but understand its flow. Then, after the policy, then we created the National Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction was created. And this was created under Home Ministry. And Home Minister is chairperson of that. Home Minister is chairperson of that. Right. So National Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction was created. After that, National Disaster Management Plan was formed. And remember, this National Disaster Management Plan was formed after Sendai framework. After Sendai framework. So it means that most of the points of Sendai framework we will find in the National Disaster Management Plan. Most of the points will be there because it is affiliated with objectives of Sendai framework. So all the priorities, all the goals will be reflected in the plan. And later it was updated. It was updated in the year 2019. So it is continuously updated after that. So this is some aspect of India's disaster management and its evolution. If they ask in UPSC, write a note on evolution of disaster management in India. So you have to remember the story starting from here, this page, and this page about the disaster management evolution in India. Right. Now, when we see the disaster management framework in India, it consists of an act of 2005, then policy of 2009, and management plan of 2016, which was revised in the year 2019. Now, when we talk about the act, you should be very clear about the institutional measures which are being set up according to that. Now, remember this, it is a very simple aspect. In the act, it created authorities. It created authority at national level, at state level, at district level. We refer that as National Disaster Management Authority, State Disaster Management Authority, District Management Authorities. Now, to provide inputs to that and implement whatever has been taken decision by authority, to provide inputs to authority and implement the decisions which are taken by authorities, we needed a committee. So hence, executive committees were created. Hence, executive committee were created. Right. It means to implement what the authorities have taken and also to provide inputs to the authorities. Right. Then, after this authority, we needed a special force, and hence a special force was created. We refer that as a disaster response force. We refer that as response force, NDRF. And after that, to run all these mechanisms, we need a finance, and hence funds were created. Funds were created. National Disaster Relief Fund, National Disaster Mitigation Funds, etc. So funds were created. And last but not the least, we needed an institution which can provide training to the officials. Without the training, it is not possible to have a proper management of disaster. And this institution provides training to the officials, higher officials, lower officials, etc. And hence, we created an institution which can provide center of excellence, training, which provides knowledge base, technical base, etc. And that is called as the National Institute of Disaster Management, which provides training to all the officials. So this you should keep in the mind. If they ask in UPSC about the act, the moment when they say act, you have to remember this act provided a structure, a legal structure, which consists of authority, executive committee, along with that response force, funds, and training, which is provided by National Institute of Disaster Management. If you remember this, 80% of your work is done here. This is how the Act of 2005 talks about. Now we'll try to decode them. What are the authorities? What are its objectives? Who are the part of these? Now don't make research on that. So whatever objectives are there, they are very simple. Read them. And if you remember 3, 4, 5 points of that, that is more than sufficient. Is that clear? So we will proceed from this. Right. So National Disaster Management Act, it provided institutional, legal, financial, and coordination mechanism at national, state, and district. Right. And these are not parallel. They are not parallel. They are all linked with each other. And apart from that, the significant aspect of disaster management of 2005 is it has made a complete change before 2005 and after 2005. So after this 2005, it has changed the way in which the disaster management is done, and that is called as paradigm shift, which made a paradigm shift. So before 2005, all the disaster managements in India were relief centered. But after 2005, we made proactive. And in proactive, the risk management is given priority. After 2005, we become proactive. And in proactive, pre-disaster management is taken into more criteria. And in pre-disaster, we always talk about risk management. So this was taken as more emphasis. And what are the 3 key factors of pre-disaster management? Prevention, preparedness, mitigation. So these 3 terms: prevention, preparedness, mitigation. So hence, this 2005 National Disaster Management Act has made a change in its scope. It changed from relief centric to proactive. You should see that, if possible, try to reduce the impact in the beginning itself, in the pre-disaster manage itself. That is prevention is better than anything. If not prevent, you mitigate that. If you are unable to prevent, if you are unable to mitigate, then you prepare for the event. We refer that as preparedness. I'm repeating this again and again because UPSC will ask the questions based on these parameters only. Is it clear? So hence 2005 and after that, entire thing was changed in disaster management. I hope it is clear. After 2005, entire approach to the disaster management was changed from relief centric to more emphasis on the risk and then for other part. Is that clear? Right. So this created a 3-tier structure at the national level, at the state level, and at the district level. Right. And later local was also added to that. Right. Now understand this. At the national level, it consists of National Disaster Management Authority. At the state level, State Disaster Management Authority. At district level, it consists of District Disaster Management Authority. So we refer this as 3-tier arrangement. 3-tier arrangement. And at the local level, we have municipalities, PRIs, etc. Right. Now, once you read the objectives of all these, then you can read this chart as roles and functions. Roles and functions. Is that clear? So you have to read the objectives. You have to read the functions of that. Read them carefully. At least remember 5 or 6 points of that for your mains, not for prelims. For mains. Right. The first one is about its part. I told that it consists of 3 authorities: national level, district level, and state level. Then it consists of committees, executive committees at national and at state level. Then it consists of something called as the force, National Disaster Response Force, at national level and at state level. Then it consists of the funds, National Disaster Response Fund and National Disaster Mitigation Fund. And then the National Institute of Disaster Management. So this is something which provides them training to all the officials, right? So this is called as the structure of the National Disaster Management Act of 2005. So it may be easy now, but practice that one time, two time, three time. Practice that and put everything in one small chart so that you can make that part anytime to reproduce if it is asked in the examination. And you have to use the data from these things, right? Now, next is the National Disaster Management Authority. Who heads that? Now, this can be important for your prelims, right? So, the National Disaster Management Authority is headed by Prime Minister of India, and he is ex officio chairman. NDMA, Prime Minister. Elected representatives, Prime Minister. Then, further, it may be having maximum of 9 members. And these 9 members are nominated by Prime Minister. Nominated by Prime Minister. And it should also have a vice chairman of National Disaster Management Authority. So Prime Minister, 9 members, and it should have a vice chairman. So this fact is for prelims, right? Now, next is about its objectives or powers and functions. Read them carefully. Don't elaborate, just read them. It is having a responsibility to create policies, plans, and guidelines for disaster management. So it lays down the policies, plans, and guidelines for disaster management at national level, which is carry forwarded to the state level. Right. It lays down the national disaster management policy, right, which is very important in the context of disaster management, right, and approve the national plan for disaster management and all other guidelines is to be followed. So it is approval agency which is created by authorities, which is created by committees, right. It also mandated to recommend guidelines for minimum standards of reliefs. Minimum standards of reliefs. And it is also having the general superintendent's control of the special force, that is National Disaster Response Force. So the special force is under National Disaster Management Authority. So these are small points which you should remember, right? So the National Institute of Disaster Management works within the framework and policies which are laid down by National Disaster Management Authority, NDMA. So these are its powers, functions, or objectives. Is it clear? So please read them, and if possible, remember at least 4 points or 5 points for mains. Right. Now, next is National Executive Committee. Now, in prelims, what you have to remember? In prelims, who is heading the National Executive Committee? Now, this National Executive Committee is headed by senior IAS officer, secretary level. So, hence, the Union Home Secretary is chairman of that. Please remember this. Union Home Secretary is chairman of National Executive Committee. And this National Executive Committee is mandated to assist the National Disaster Management Authority with their knowledge and experience. With their knowledge, experience, etc. Because these IAS officers, they are having tremendous knowledge throughout their course of journey. They are experts in many parts. So those expertise are used in framing them, right? And it also consists of secretaries of different departments like agriculture, atomic energy, defense, drinking, all the different ministries secretaries. So remember, a senior IAS officer will be heading that. Apart from that, it is also have the secretaries of Ministry of External Affairs, Earth Science, Human Resource Development, and other parts. So sometimes they may ask in the prelims, not in detail, somewhere they ask. The person who heads the National Executive Committee is Union Home Secretary. Is that clear? And Ministry of External Affairs and all, they are called as special invitees. Special invitees who help in disaster management perspectives, right? Now, what are objectives, what are powers, and what are functions of National Executive Committee? Their functions, powers, objectives. They have to assist the National Disaster Management Authority in functioning, implement the plans and policies which have been made by NDMA, then ensure the compliances with the direction of central government, and they should act as a coordinating and monitoring body in the context of disaster management, coordinating and monitoring body. So the coordinating and monitoring body in the disaster management is the National Executive Committee. National Executive Committee, right? It prepares the guidelines for different ministries, right? And it also provides technical assistance to the state government. So all these are its objectives: advice, coordinating, guidelines, approvals, etc. So read them. At least if you remember, 5 points of that is sufficient for mains. For mains. National Executive Committee, right? And its powers. Now this is at the national level. The replica of that is in the state government. Whatever powers are there, the same type of powers the state government will be having. Now, the elected head of the state government is Chief Minister. So, the state government disaster authority will be headed by Chief Minister. It is headed by Chief Minister. State Disaster Management Authority, right? And its objectives and powers are also same like what the National Disaster Management Authorities are there. That is for national level, and this is for state and the districts and talukas within its ambit. It is for the states, the districts, and the talukas within its ambit, right? So it approves the state plan, coordinates the implementation, and mitigation preparedness funds, etc. So whatever the authority is doing in the center, the same thing it is doing in the state level. So Prime Minister, here it is Chief Minister, right? Then National Executive Committee is under Secretary. Now here also we are having the State Executive Committee, and the State Executive Committee is headed by Chief Secretary of a state. In prelims, if they ask, it is headed by Chief Secretary of a state. So these 4 points you should remember. 4 points you should remember, right? It also provides information, data, and coordination. So the rest remains the same, right? Authorities and executive committees. Is that clear? Please read them carefully. Read them carefully and make notes of that. Then District Disaster Management Authority. Now here you will find a small change. In the District Disaster Management Authority, it will be headed by elected representative and also an IAS officer. Elected representative and IAS officer. So please remember this point. Right. It will be headed by district collector or deputy commissioner or district magistrate. District magistrate, as also with elected representative of local authority as co-chairperson. Co-chairperson. Is that clear? So he is not subordinate, he is co-chairperson. So it consists of chairperson and co-chairperson. Is it clear? So always remember these points. Authorities. See, when we talk about them, their scopes changes. At the national level, it is different. See, when we say prime minister's role is different. His powers are different. Their perspectives and their scope of interaction is different. Chief minister is a boss of a state, but he is not the boss of the nation. So their scopes vary. So hence we have made segregation of that. Please understand that. The area of operation varies. So to demarcate that, we refer them. Right. So it is also the same. Planning, coordinating, and implementing at that. So hence, at the national level, at the state level, and at the district level. At the district level, remember, co-chairperson and chairperson. And rest remains the same. Making plan, application, and whatever authorities have given, they have to apply that. They have to make a plan and apply what has been passed from the state to the districts. Is it clear? So again and again, I'm telling you, center will have big scope, then state, then district. The area of operations will be different. Is it clear? Now, National Disaster Response Force. This is called as the specialized force. And this specialized force is directly under National Disaster Management Authority, NDMA. And the boss of this National Disaster Response Force is referred as General Superintendence and Control. He is referred as the Director General of Civil Defense and National Disaster Response Force. The boss or the highest officer of National Disaster Response Force, a specialized force, is Director General of Civil Defense and National Disaster Response Force, right? And these are the forces which are deployed in the pre-disaster aspect, and they play an important role in rescue and relief. They play an important role in rescue and relief measures. Relief measures. Now, in the year 2006, there were 8 battalions. But if you take the data at present, we are having 16 battalions. At present, we are having 16 battalions. But from where we have these special forces? So these special forces are from different units of Border Security Force, BSF, Border Security Force. They are from Central Industrial Security Force, CISF, Central Industrial Security Force, Central Industrial Security Force, then Central Reserve Police Force, CRPF, and they consist of Seema Sashastra Bal, SSB, Seema Sashastra Bal. It consists of Indo-Tibetan Border Police, ITBP. Indo-Tibetan Border Police. And it also consists of the personnels from Assam Rifles. So please remember these. So the 16 battalions. Battalions means troops. Their groups. NCC battalion. Battalion of an army. Battalion means group. Troop or group. We refer them as battalions. Right. So BSF, CISF, CRPF, Seema Sashastra Bal, Indo-Tibetan Border Police, and Assam Rifles. So from all these, they will be there. Right. And each battalion will have 18 self-contained specialists who are very well versed in search and rescue. And they are engineers, technicians, electricians, dog squads, and even the doctors. So hence we refer that as a specialized force. Specialized force, right? And these battalions, they are equipped and trained to respond natural as well as man-made disasters. Natural as well as man-made disasters like nuclear reactors and all. And they are deployed in timely manner. They are deployed in timely manner, right? So we have the same at the state level. We refer them as the State Disaster Response Force. State Disaster Response Force. Is that clear? And these are the 16 battalions. Now, you don't have to by heart them. You don't have to by heart. Just remember that 16 battalions are there. If anything happens, if any cyclone is there, take an example of Andhra Pradesh. So this 10th battalion takes care of that. Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, and Karnataka. Right. So National Disaster Response Force, and in the same way, State Disaster Response Force. Anytime, whenever cyclones, earthquake, landslides are there, so both are deployed. Deployed at the places. Anytime, whenever such events are there. Is it clear? And they are very specifically. Don't worry about RRC. Leave that RRCs. Regional resource centers. Leave that. Praveen, don't go with minute thing. Just leave that. Don't take extra burden. Right. So please remember. See, when we talk about these perspective, you should be very well versed. Your eye should be like an eagle or hawk. When you talk about Rajasthan and Gujarat, they are in this. Your eye should be like an hawk. Then only you can qualify in your any type of the exams you are taking. You should be very specific in catching that point, right? So Rajasthan and Gujarat both are under this belt. So these are referred as the 16 battalions. You should be very sharp enough to catch because there is very small amount of errors in the context of exam perspective, right? So here you don't have to worry why they are divided separately. Why they have divided separately? Maybe because of different types of disasters which are affecting in that areas. Or sometimes the newly added battalions were there. So initially, when we talk about that, 12 were there. 4 were added in the later stage. 4 were added some later stage. So from 8 to 12, then 4 were added later stage. Right? They will never ask you in detail about that, but you should be knowing these. But if you are writing about state exams, so in that state government, they may ask which zone is included in the exams. If you are writing about State Public Service Commission, then they may ask question on this. So here remember specialized force, from where they have taken, what it consists of, in which field they are experts enough. Right. Now, we moved on to a National Institute of Disaster Management. Now, with reference to National Institute of Disaster Management, you should remember. See, when you talk about NCR Delhi specifically, because it is a capital of India. It is a capital of India, and you need to know that more foolproof concern is required for that. As a capital of that, you need to have more impact on that region. Right. Now, National Institute of Disaster Management always provides training. Now, this training will help in increasing the capacity. It will help in increasing the capacity. And this capacity can be done only when they make more research on that. So hence it is associated with training, capacity building, research, etc. So hence it is knowledge based perspective, and it is the center of excellence which provides training to all the officials at national level and also at the district part. So it provides the training so that they become experts in their field in disaster management. So this is called as National Institute of Disaster Management. Right. Stakeholders means other peoples, civil societies. So its idea is to provide training, increase their capacities so that the mitigation is done, awareness is created. Right. So this is National Institute of Disaster Management. Right. Don't make research on that. Now, in a nutshell, this you already did in your polity. But here, just recollect that. In the context of the national disaster management, where the institutional setups are there, at the top level, decision making is Cabinet Committee on Security, CCS, Cabinet Committee on Security, and National Crisis Management Committee. National Crisis Management Committee. Apart from that, two important institutions are there. One is the National Disaster Management Authority, which we have made an attempt in understanding, and National Executive Committee. So these are the four institutes which you should remember: Cabinet Committee on Security, National Crisis Management Committee, National Disaster Management Authority, and National Executive Committee. Is that clear? And their powers, their roles, and who heads them. The Cabinet Committee on Secretary. It is headed by Prime Minister. If you are not done in your polity, just focus on this point. Prime Minister. And who else is part of that? Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Home Affairs, and Ministry of External Affairs. So this can be asked in your prelims. Who all are part of Cabinet Committee on Security? And these are its roles. Second, National Crisis Management Authority. Very important one. Now, who heads the National Crisis Management Committee? It is Cabinet Secretary. Cabinet Secretary. Then who else are there? All the secretaries of different ministries. And this is its roles and responsibilities. Right. So please read them carefully for your prelims, for your mains as well. Right. So don't make much research on that. Just whatever charts are there, more than sufficient. I can assure you this is more than sufficient. Right. Then National Disaster Management Authority, already we have studied about that. Prime Minister and 9 members. and these are its powers or objectives. Then National Executive Committee, who heads that, and its powers and responsibilities. So read often and often about these four institutions. In polity also they may ask, in disaster management also they may ask. They are very important for your prelims, they are very important for your mains. Read them carefully, don't neglect this part. So certain slides are there where I am telling important, please focus on them and read them carefully. If possible, write separately and keep them aside, right? Then this is for your prelims. Just glance that. Sometimes if any disaster is there, then which is the nodal agency for that? If you're talking about disasters in the mines, so Ministry of Coal Mines is its nodal agency. Not always Home Ministry, not always Home Ministry. Apart from that, different ministries can also be its nodal part. If you are talking about oil spills, it is Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Coast Guard. If you are talking about road accidents, Ministry of Road Transports and Highway, MORTH, right? If you're talking about urban floods, Ministry of Urban Floods. So these can be asked in match the following. Match the following in prelims. So please read them carefully. Not for mains, they are for prelims. In state government or in the national, they may ask, match the following of concern ministries. Right. Now, National Disaster Response and Mitigation Funds. Now we'll talk about funds. Financial arrangements, right? Now, during the 11th Finance Commission, a fund was created which is referred as National Calamity Contingency Fund. National Calamity Contingency Fund. It was in the 11th Finance Commission, which provides about providing finance to the disaster perspective. But after the act which was created, after 2005 Act, that is National Disaster Management Act. Now this National Calamity Contingency Fund, it was restructured and renamed as the National Disaster Response Force. It was renamed as the National Disaster Response Fund. And this is placed under public account funds. It is placed under public account fund. Is that clear? So now we don't have contingency fund. Fund is replaced, renamed, restructured as the National Disaster Response Fund. And what is the role of National Disaster Response Fund? It is providing financial assistance in relief, response, and rehabilitation in the event of disaster relief. Now, this is the main source of fund which is provided to the state governments. It is the main source of fund to the state government. So it supplements to the state disaster response force in context of any disasters, right? So it provides to SDRF, right? So the main financial assistance to the state disaster response fund is the National Disaster Response Fund, right? So hence, financial arrangement is NDRF to State Disaster Response Fund. Now remember here, the State Disaster Response Fund is the fund which is available for state governments for handling the disasters, at the state level. Right. Now, please understand one point. So when we talk about the State Disaster Response Fund, focus on this discussion. If you are talking about 100% of the funds which are referred as the State Disaster Response Fund, or you say if it is 100 rupees, then out of 100 rupees, 90%, 90 rupees goes for notified disasters. 90%. And 10% or 10 rupees goes for the local disaster, or non-notified disaster. Now, in the context of India, there is a process. They will never ask you how the process is there. The Ministry of Home Affairs at the national level, it is not decided by the state. The notified disasters are not decided by the states. It is by experts, and Ministry of Home Affairs decides that, not the state government. And in the present scenarios, we have 12 notified disasters before 2020. 12 notified disasters were there before 2020, and they are, remember them carefully: cyclone, drought, flood, tsunami, hailstorms, landslides, avalanche, cloudburst, pest attack, frost and cold waves, fire, and earthquake. So these are the 12 notified disasters which were there before 2020. And 90% of the fund the state government can use for these funds. Now here you don't have heat waves. Heat waves are not notified disaster. They are not nationally notified disasters. Cold waves and frosts are in the national notified disaster. So hence, many state governments are making an appeal to the Ministry of Home Affairs that as the heat waves are increasing, please include these heat waves in the nationally notified disaster so that we can use 90% of the fund available for the state impact. Because 10% is very less amount to use for the heat waves. So that's why many state governments are making their responses, making their sound, making their voices, requesting to the Ministry of Home Affairs that please include these heat waves into the nationally notified part so that the 90% of the fund can be used for rescue relief plans in the context of the heat as a part. Right. So please remember this. Please remember these things. Now, if you want to make research, that is your call. What is required for exam, I am telling, and even if you remember 70% of that, that is more than sufficient. Right. So these are referred as notified disaster. Now, this is up to 2020. Now, what happened in the year 2020? In the year 2020, where entire world was having a problem of COVID-19. Now, after its geographical extent, the World Health Organization declared the COVID as pandemic. It declared as pandemic. Right. And after that, government of India, it used the acts like Epidemics Disease Act of 1897, Epidemics Disease Act of 1897, and Disaster Management Act of 2005. And by using these two acts, they declared COVID-19 as notified disaster, nationally notified disaster. So hence, at present 2024, in the context of India, we are having 12 plus 1, 13 nationally notified disaster. And the State Disaster Management Authority can use 90% of the fund to these 13 nationally notified disasters. Is it clear? Now, what were the advantages of these things? The moment when you put the COVID here, what all happened here? The first aspect is that the state government could use 90% of the fund in the COVID parameters. So, State Disaster Response Fund, 90% of the fund was used for that, so that it can use them for giving compensation for the dead, relief measures, and provide financial assistance to the COVID warriors. So it can use 90% of the fund to provide compensation, to take rescue measures, to purchase equipments, etc. The second aspect of that is as the cost of the treatment was very high in the private hospitals, the government hospitals, the public hospitals did not have infrastructure. So hence, the moment when they classified that as a notified disaster, then the state government were able to fix the rates of treatment in the private hospitals. The state government fixed the rates of treatment in private hospitals. So hence, after that, the rates were finalized for treatment in the private hospitals. And the third aspect is the moment when they declared that as a notified disaster, as a legal part, then they imposed lockdown. Right. So this is how the act and other parts are there. Now, sometimes they may ask in your mains or prelims. So remember this. At present, we are having 13 nationally notified disaster. COVID was added in the year 2020, and 90% of this is used for that. Is that clear? So this is what you should remember. Right. Now, how the funding is given? 75% for general category states and union territories, and 90% for the special categories and certain union territories. Is that clear? Water issue due to heat waves in Delhi, it is called as local disaster. So they have to use within the 10%. Is that clear? nationally notified disasters. So be careful with these points. They are very important for your prelims and for your mains. Right. Now we always come across lightning and thunderstorm, which has been raised again and again. In India, the deaths were more. Lightning is something where we find more amount of deaths are there, like Odisha, West Bengal. Many deaths are there, and these state governments are making an appeal to the central government to bring lightning thunderstorm also under the nationally notified disaster. So in spite of many efforts, so this lightning is not included in the notified disaster. Maybe they may include next year, but today, as per now, lightning is not included into notified disaster. Also, heat waves is not included into notified disaster. So please keep these things in the mind. Lightning is the major killer, but still it is not included. They have to make other parameters while implementing them, right? So they are the most weather phenomena, and lightning is one of the major killers where deaths were there. Every year, around 2,500 people die due to thunderstorm and lightning. So they are making their points. Deaths are more. Please implement them. Please put them into notified disasters so that we can provide financial assistance. Even today, also, if any person is died because of lightning in the state government, so the financial assistance which is given in the death of lightning is not a legally one. It means that they can't have the legally demanding part. So whatever money is given is from the state government. Generally we refer that as ex gratia. Ex gratia, which is given by state government from its 10% or from its budget in context of the events like lightning and thunderstorms. We refer that as ex gratia, not a compensation. It's ex gratia as a humanitarian assistance. It is not compulsory. It is not compulsory. Humanitarian assistance. Is that clear? Now, Indian Meteorological Department of Ministry of Earth Science has four types of forecasts. Four types of forecasts for thunderstorms. So please remember them for lightning, gusty winds, and all. So one is before 1 to 5 days. Short range, 24 hours in advance. Very short range, in 3 hours in advance. So these are how the early warning systems are given. And remember, lightning and thunderstorms are the results of extreme weather conditions. Extreme weather conditions, right? Now, do we have any types of apps which can disseminate them? Yes, we are having Damini mobile app and Rain Alarm. Damini mobile app and Rain Alarm, which provides the data 30 to 40 minutes in advance. Prelims. Prelims. And warning of lightning. Warning for lightning occurrence is also provided. Apart from Damini, apart from Rain Alarm, we also have apps like Mausam, Umang, and Meghdut. Mausam, Umang, and Meghdut. So these all are your prelims. If you are writing next year, if you are taking state government exams, any exams for that matter, they are very important. They are very important. So please read this. You should be very careful in understanding what are nationally notified disasters and what are the non-notified disasters. Fix that in the mind. At present, we are having 13. And there is a voice for taking heat waves, lightning in the nationally notified. But today, they are not nationally notified disasters. Is that clear now? Okay. So in the beginning, they were asking about these things, whether heat waves is a part of that. So somebody asked that heat waves is a part of that or not. Heat waves is not a part of that. I hope it is clear. If you are attending the class, I hope it is clear when we talk about the notified disaster of heat waves. Right. Now, National Disaster Mitigation Fund. So remember, mitigation fund. No, it was not created immediately after the act. It was created very late. It was established on February 2021. Very late it was established. But before 2021, the financial assistance was central sponsored schemes. So what type of central sponsored scheme? Central sponsored schemes means Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana or Manrega, Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. So Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana, Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment. So these were used to create infrastructures. Right? Now, what is the meaning of mitigation? Mitigation means reducing the impact. So when you construct the irrigation facility, it will reduce the drought condition. It will reduce the impact of that event. So mitigation means these funds are for reducing the impact of that disaster. And they will always talk about permanent infrastructures. They always talk about permanent infrastructure. Right? So permanent restoring of the structures here. So beginning, it was only from the central sponsored schemes, but from February 5, 2021, now we find that a separate fund has been initiated to that. So please remember about this. Mitigation is different, response is different. You should demarcate them. Right? Now, Prime Minister's National Relief Fund, and this was set up in the year 1948. So, fund and their parameters, just read them. And this fund was to assist the displaced people from Pakistan. To assist the displaced people from Pakistan who came India after partition. And for that, the fund was created. Right? Now it is being used for the kins who were killed in the natural disasters. It is entirely with public donation, no budgetary allocation. And the minimum donation is 100 rupees. Entirely donation. Right? Then initially it was managed by committee, but a change was introduced in the year 1985. Now, Prime Minister is sole discretionary for dispersal. When? From 1985. Right? Then Joint Secretary administers the funds on honorary basis. Honorary basis means it is not a statutory one. Honorary by part. Right? Joint Secretary has an honorary basis. Minimum donation is 100 rupees. Now, apart from that, controversial fund was created, PM Care Fund, in the year 2020. It is to deal emergency and distress condition. To deal emergency and distress conditions. And this was during the COVID 2020, right? To provide relief to the people. Who are affected. So generally it is referred as charitable fund. Public charitable fund, we say. Public charitable fund. Right. Now here also it is voluntary contribution. You can't force anybody to give. It is the donation which is given by honorary basis. Right? Honorary basis. See, when you talk about fund, nobody force you to give 1 rupee or 10 rupee. It is your humanitarian assistance. If you are having humanitarian assistance, then you will contribute to this fund for working. Some business tycoons will give, some institutions will give, some individual person who believe that yes, I can contribute to something, so voluntarily they can give. Right? So it is again a voluntary contribution, no budgetary allocation, and minimum contribution here is 10 rupees. Minimum contribution is 10 rupees. It is referred as Prime Minister Citizens Assistance and Relief in Emergency Situation. We refer that as PM Care Fund, which was set up in March 2020 during COVID-19. Right. And here you should remember, Prime Minister is ex officio chairman of that. And 3 other ministries are part of that. Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Home Affairs, and Ministry of Finance are ex officio trustee. They are not honorary, they are ex officio trustee. They are ex officio trustee. So remember, Prime Minister and 3 ministries: Defense, Home Affairs, and Finance. Defense, Home Affairs, and Finance. Is it clear? So this is about the PM Cares Fund, which was set up in the year 2020. See, there is a lack of transparent allegation. That's why I told you it is controversial, and they say that it is a public charitable fund. So it is still to be decided by the high courts. So they said that we need to understand what amount of money has been entered and where the money has been gone. So the PMO and all authorities have said that it is a public charitable fund, and hence it is not comes under the purview of RTI. Right? So that is where they say it is a charitable fund, and that is where still the debate is being going on. Still, legal impacts are there. Right? So this is something which you have to remember. Right? Then 15th Finance Commission 2021 to 2026, a new fund was created. A new fund was created, and this new fund is referred as National Disaster Risk Management Fund. And the total allocation of 68,463 crores were given for this National Disaster Risk Management Fund. And out of this fund, 80% of the fund is given for National Disaster Response Fund. So this fund consists of two subdivisions. That fund consists of two subdivisions. Right. One is National Disaster Relief Fund, and 20% will be for National Disaster Mitigation Fund. So please remember that a new fund, National Disaster Risk Management Fund, for 2021 to 26, and the total investment to that is 68,463. Out of that, 80% will be for National Disaster Relief Fund, National Disaster Mitigation Fund. Is that clear? Now, certain breakup of that. 2 out of that, National Disaster Relief Fund, they have given certain money for that. One is for expansion and modernization of fire services. 5,000 crore has been allocated. And resettlement and displacement of affected erosion. So amount is not yet allocated, but for that also they will allocate certain amount. Then the separate aspect, that is National Disaster Mitigation Fund. So here they have already made an allocation for 12 drought prone states and 7 areas where floods are dominant, urban floods. And for that they are allocated 2,500 crore rupees under the new Finance Commission. And also seismic and landslides. Seismic means earthquake, right? Then mitigation measures to prevent soil erosion. So this is allocation of the new fund. from 2021 to 2026. The 15th Finance Commission. Facts which can be asked in prelims. And if they ask in the mains also, you should remember. Write a note on the National Disaster Management and the contribution of Finance Commission. Right. Now, this is, you have to remember, I told you while defining the earthquake, Coalition for Disaster and Resilient Infrastructure. Very important one. Very important one. And this was established in the year 2009. Remember, resilient means two definitions. One is, it talks about resistant, and second one is recover quickly. Recover quickly, right? So hence, in the year 2019, Government of India proposed for setting up of this. Along with India, 12 countries were founding members of this. Along with India, 12 countries were founding members of that. The idea is to create infrastructures, not only in the natural disasters, even in the context of certain climatic hazards, right? So creating resilience infrastructure systems for climate and disaster risks. Resilience means resistant and recover quickly, right? So it is about sustainable development goals should be part of that. And these all the structures, the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructures, they will support the Paris Agreement of Climate Change, Sendai Framework of Disaster Management. Paris Agreement on Climate Change, Sendai Framework, and Sustainable Development. So this Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure is supporting all the three, which are three: Sustainable Development Goal, Paris Agreement of Climate Change, and Sendai Framework. Right? Yes, similar initiative at international level. Similar, but it is not COP. It is not Conference of Parties. Don't call it as Conference of Parties. It is a group of countries which are working in this regard. So sometimes they may ask this in prelims and also in the mains. So when you're talking about structural measures, so remember, Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure should be added in that when you're writing answers in the context of structural measures for disaster management. Right. Next is National Policy on Disaster Management 2009. Now this is something which you have to be remembering. So it is integrated approach at all levels. Now what is integrated? Integrated means clubbing. So it is integration of knowledge, innovation, right? So when we say knowledge means the traditional knowledge where they are not gone to school. So for their knowledge is also included. Knowledge, innovation, and education. So integration of all these, then it encourages the mitigation measures. Now, how it encourages the mitigation measures? Mitigation means reduction, right? So how it does that? It is doing that by using technology. That is through technology, then traditional knowledge, and environment sustainability. environment sustainability. Environment sustainability. Is that clear? So this is how they make the mitigation part. Then bring mainstream disaster management into development planning process. The same one. Link disaster management as a development process so that sustainability has to be done here. Then efficient mechanism. How efficiency it can be? What is the way in which you can make it efficient? So this can be done only when you make assessment and monitoring. So efficiency by monitoring and assessment. And assessment. Then proper reconstruction work. This is post-disaster work to build back better. To build back better. Right. Then productive, proactive partnership with media, so that this media will help in disseminating the knowledge. Disseminating the knowledge. Or sometimes it is used in providing relief measures. Relief measures. For example, if any train accident is there, so media will provide the number, and those numbers will be used to identify, trace the people who are affected by that. So hence it plays an important role in dissemination of early warning system and also relief measures. Early warning systems and also relief measures. So this is national policy on disaster management. So if they ask for 10 marks, please write them. This is for your mains. Next is national disaster management framework. Right now, this framework is, it provides the framework and direction to the government agencies for all the phases of disaster management. Now, this national disaster framework is called as a holistic approach. It is referred as holistic approach. Why? Because it is framed by keeping Sendai framework. It is framed by keeping the Paris Agreement, that is climate change issues. Climate change issues. And it is also framed by keeping sustainable development goals. Sustainable development goals. So hence it is referred as holistic approach. Apart from that, this national disaster management framework is referred as a dynamic entity. It is referred as a dynamic entity or dynamic document. Right, dynamic document. Now, why it is referred as a dynamic document? The first thing is it can be implemented at any stage. It can be implemented at any stage or all three stages. All three stages, that is pre-disaster, at the time of disaster, and post-disaster. Plus, it is always updated. It is always updated. Right. So how it is always updated? By incorporating best practices and knowledge. By incorporating best practices and knowledge. Best practices and knowledge. Right. Then, along with this, it also have goals, and these goals There are short-term goals, which are for 5 years. Medium goals, which will be for 10 years. And long-term goals, which will be for 15 years. 15 years. So hence, it is referred as a dynamic document. So remember, it is a dynamic document and it is holistic approach. And it is a framework and direction to government agencies for all the phases of disaster management cycle. So this you can use in the introduction part. Now, as it is linked with the Sendai framework, so all the points of Sendai framework will be reflected as its objectives, right? So its objectives will be improve understanding risk vulnerabilities, strengthening the disaster risk governance, proactive, promote build back better, that is post disaster, resettlement, rehabilitation, empower local authorities and communities. So it means increasing their capacities, strengthening the scientific capabilities, provide clarity on roles and responsibilities, that is to increase accountability and monitoring. So this will increase accountability and monitoring, right? Capacity development, so that the vulnerability is reduced. Then connecting that to the development process, right? Then preparedness should be increased. This is pre-disaster management. Pre-disaster. So this is something which you have to remember in the context of disaster management framework. And this entire thing again was revised in the year 2019. It means updations were added in the 2019. So this is something which you have to keep in the mind, right? Framework, policies, framework, policy, act, right? Now, national platform for disaster risk reduction. National platform for disaster risk reduction, right? So it is a multi-stakeholder platform which consists of government of India. It means the central government will be there. It consists of state government and also local people combinedly. So hence it is a multi-stakeholder platform which discuss about all types of the events, all types of the impacts, all types of measures which can be done here, right? And they will also share their experiences in ongoing. So this plays a very important role, which links the center to the state and the local people. And they make the meeting. So 3 times meeting was done. 3 times meeting was done. The first meeting was in the year 2013, and this was the theme of that. Mainstream the disaster risk development from risk to resilience. This is mainly to implement the National Disaster Management Act of 2005. Then the second meeting was disaster risk reduction for sustainable development, and this was in the year 2018. And this was to apply what will happen when we make Sendai framework and Paris Agreement. How its impact in the disasters. So this was the theme of second meeting. And the third meeting was to create a resilience in climate change. And this was in the year March 2023. And this national platform for disaster risk reduction is headed by Home Minister. Is headed by Home Minister. Is that clear? Headed by Home Minister. DRR stands for disaster risk reduction. Disaster risk reduction. At least understand this. When we say DRR, it means disaster risk reduction. Okay. Now, responding to the central assistance, this is the flow. So, central assistance provides to the state government finance and technical assistance. Center provides finance and technical assistance. Technical assistance, right? So, the government of India provides response mechanism. Whatever I have told, it is in reading. So, please read this. They will never ask you in detail about that. So in between, I told you how the central will provide finance. So this is the mechanism in which it is given. So many students asked how it is given. So this is the mechanism which is there. So please read this. It is provided by a process, and this is the process which is involved. And UPSC will never ask you how the process is there. This is for extra. You can read it, right? Then, in the context of financial assistance for disaster preparedness, restoration, and reconstruction, this is very important point. Providing financial assistance for disaster preparedness, restoration, reconstruction, and mitigation in the event of natural disasters. They are given from National Disaster Mitigation Fund. They are not part of National Disaster Response Fund. They are not the part of National Disaster Response Fund, because mitigation fund is separately which has been created in the year 2021. National Disaster Mitigation Fund. And National Disaster Response Fund is something which is for relief and rescue. Relief, rescue, etc. So please understand that. Please understand these two funds. Is that clear? So preparedness, restoration, reconstruction, and mitigation. See, Ramandeep, this is just read. You don't have to break it. This is the process which is involved. Responding to request of the central assistance, how the process is involved. How the process is involved. Don't get much stressed for this. Just read. Whatever I told, a process is defined here. Right. Now, the fund is given, and this is 90% and 20%. Only that you have to remember. State Disaster Response Fund, 90% for notified and 10% for local funds. Right. Then the report of central team is given. This is the process. How the fund from the center reaches to the state government. How the fund is reaching from center to the state. They will never ask you in examination. In prelims, they will never ask you. This is the mechanism. If you are reading this, this will enhance your knowledge base. This will enhance your knowledge base. Then, accepting foreign assistance. As a matter of policy, the government of India do not issue any appeal for foreign assistance. We do not appeal. But as a goodwill gesture and solidarity, it can be accepted. But when it is accepted, it has to coordinate with the Ministry of External Affairs. It has to be coordinated with the Ministry of External Affairs. External Affairs. Then only the financial assistance can be given. So financial assistance or financial assistance are not mandatory. Government will not ask, but as a goodwill gesture, it can be. Goodwill gesture, it can be. Is that clear? Then multilateral assistance, different types of technological, technical, etc. Technological, technical assistance from agencies, agencies, agencies. Then India will accept the offer only if government consider they are necessary, necessary, right? And again, it is scrutinized. It is scrutinized. It is scrutinized by Department of Economic Affairs. Economic Affairs. So multilateral assistance is also scrutinized. Financial assistance is also scrutinized. Is that clear? So any types of assistance, humanitarian assistance which are there, the government can accept only when their motivation is selfishness, without any selfish part, right? And this is also when the government feels it is necessary. So this is accepting the multilateral assistance, right? So that completes your entire disaster management class. So this is end of the disaster management class. So we completed entire disaster management class now. Now, this is what the UPSC prelims and mains requires. So if you remember 70% of this also, this is more than sufficient, right? So just read them, Ramandeep, just read them, and wherever I have marked them, make a point of that. It is the process which is involved. This is process which is involved. Train accidents also come under disaster. I told you many times that they are man-made disasters. I told you that they are man-made disasters. I told you about Kavach. I told you about that. So focus on listening when the class goes on. Right. I told you that train accidents and all. I gave an example of Kavach as a preparedness. They are called as man-made disasters, which can be averted if we have anti-collision devices, etc. Human errors, technical errors. I told you train accidents, nuclear bombs, stampedes, war, all these are man-made nuclear disasters. Is it clear? Now you can have a break of 5 minutes. Then we will take up the two questions we have discussed, and then we will complete the other discussions also, right? So we will start the class at 6:50. We will start the class at 6:50, and maybe by 7:15 or 7:20 we will wind up the class. We have already discussed two questions of previous year. So we discussed this question yesterday, and we discussed this question as well, right? So another three questions are there, so, which were asked in the examination. So you can have a break of that, and then 6:50 we will start the class. I have completed entire syllabus, not leaving anything untouched. Everything has been completed in the context of disaster management. Okay, welcome all after the break. So hope I'm audible as well as visible to you all, right? Okay. Now, before starting writing answers to any of the questions, one thing you should remember when you are making the notes on disaster management. If you remember this, 80% of your work will become easy. What you should keep in the mind or writing any answer. If you're writing anything on the disaster, that you have to check that disaster whether it is a natural disaster or man-made disaster, whether it is natural or whether it is man-made. Man-made like nuclear accidents, bomb explosions, train accidents, stampedes, we refer them as man-made. Natural means earthquake, volcanoes, right? Soil erosion, etc. We refer them as natural. Now, after that natural, within the natural, there are certain disasters which we refer them as extreme weather based. There are some which are extreme weather based, extreme weather or associated with climatic within the natural climatic. Now, these climatic means that they have early warning system. So this you should keep in the mind. So they have early warning system, right? Earthquake is not climate based. So hence in the earthquake, there will be no early warning system. So you should keep these things in the mind, right? So when we talk about the earthquake, earthquake is not extreme weather based. So hence in the earthquake, etc., there will be no early warning system. No early warning system. This you should keep in the mind. Then when you move on to the man-made, these man-made natural disasters, sorry, man-made disasters, they can be avoided. They can be avoided. So this you should keep in the mind. They can be avoided. And here, natural disasters, they cannot be avoided. So what you can do in the context of natural disasters, only best way is mitigating them. You reduce the severity of that. Mitigation is done. So understand the flow of that natural disaster and man-made disasters. This you should keep in the mind. Now after that, any disaster when you are studying, you should remember what is pre-disaster management, what is at the time of disaster, and then what is post-disaster. Post-disaster. These three things you should keep in the mind. In the pre-disaster management, we always talk about risk assessment. And in the post-disaster, we always talk about crisis arrangement. Now, when you're talking about risk perspective, it should always consist of prevention, then if not mitigation, and if not preparedness. Preparedness, right? Now in the context of the crisis, it talks about more specifically resettlement, rescue, relief, etc. And the activities which are done during the time of disaster, we refer that as critical facilities. So please remember these things. Now, to make these more effective, we always talk about structural measures and non-structural measures. So you should make a list of that. What type of structural measures are there? What type of non-structural measures are there? What type of structural and what type of non-structural measures are there? You should be making them. At least 3-4 points you should remember. Right. Always keep this perspectives. Right. Now, when you are making the content of this, you should understand or you should refer the aspects which are at national and international level. So you should always talk about Sendai framework. When you're writing, you should keep Sendai framework in the mind. Now, when you're talking about Indian perspective, you should remember the National Disaster Management Act of 2005. You have to remember the policy and framework. Apart from that, there is something called as National Disaster Management Authority, which has given the guidelines. Right? So guidelines of that, right? So this is how you should make your preparation. What type of disaster is there? Then what is pre, what is post? What are structural measures, non-structural measures? What is Sendai framework? If any guidelines, what guidelines are there? That should be kept in the mind. And then that disaster is a natural or man-made. If it is natural, then it is extreme weather based or non-extreme weather based. If it is extreme weather based, then you should remember it should have early warning system. If it is non-extreme based like earthquake, volcano, then that will not be having early warning systems. Is that clear? So you should remember this. Now, apart from this, what else you have to make? You have to practice the map of India. You have to practice the map of India and where the different events are happening. Plus, you have to always update current affairs. Like in the early warning system, I told about NISAR. And in the landslides, I told about soil nailing and hydroseeding. So these all are your current affairs. So when I discussed landslide, I told something about in the Nilgiris. As a pilot basis, we are doing the process of soil nailing for slope stabilization and hydroseeding. So you have to update them. That will fetch you extra marks. Doppler radar weather systems. Coalition for disaster resilience infrastructures. So all such types of data you should fix when you are making the notes. So maps along with current affairs. Plus, you should develop a technique of developing flowcharts. Flowcharts are very, very important. The reason is, if the question is asked for 50 words, if the question is asked for 100 words, if the same question is asked for 150 words, so you can explain in detail in 150 words. If it is for 50 words, you can express entire thing in flowcharts with a diagram. Because in geography, one diagram is equivalent to 100 words. One diagram is equivalent to 100 words. Now, if you are attempting any question in the disaster management and the time left out is hardly 3 minutes for you, so in that 3 minutes, you can express everything with one map and flow chart. And if you are master in representing that by using a map and flow chart, out of 10 you will get not less than 6 or 7. So what you can write in 10 minutes you can complete in 2 minutes by using skills, by representing them in the flow chart and the maps. And always remember, current affairs plays an important role in disaster management, like sponge cities. That is very important when you are talking about the disaster management. So all the current affairs you should be adding with your structure. So please make sure that you are not missing anything. And this slide will help you in the context of preparing any type of the content which is required in the context of disaster management. So keep this slide, read them, segregate them. Then you can write very good answers in the context of any answers which is asked there. Is that clear now? So focus on this slide, read them, keep them aside, because structural and non-structural measures will be same for all 10 disasters. Risk factors, crisis factors will be same for all the disasters. Once you know the basics of that, you don't have to write them again and again. Policies remains the same, framework remains the same, only words and certain criteria will change. That's it, but the structure remains the same. Is that clear? So this you should keep in the mind. Now we will move on to a question. The question is, discuss about the vulnerability of India to earthquake related to hazard. Give examples including the salient features of major disasters caused by earthquake in different parts of India during the last 30 decades. Sorry, 3 decades. 3 decades means 30 years. 30 years. So here when you're writing answers, very simple. First thing is you should give the definition of earthquake. You should give the definition of earthquake, right? Then you should define the earthquake are 3 types, that is shallow, intermediate and deep earthquake. Deep earthquake, right? And in the context of India, which type of earthquakes are dominant? Shallow and intermediate. In the context of India, we have shallow and intermediate earthquakes. So I given a definition, and then you have given them something which is linked with the basic part, shallow and intermediate, right? Now the reasons for the earthquake, you can give them in a block. The reasons for the earthquake: natural as well as man-made. So man-made you can give 1 or 2. Dam, you don't have to elaborate. Don't elaborate. Dam construction, fracking, mining, etc. Natural, plate tectonics, volcanic eruptions. Right? So you have given the causes of that. Earthquake, causes of that. Right? So 2 things you have mentioned: introduction and its causes. Now, vulnerability profile of India, that is your second part, vulnerability. Now, the moment when you talk about vulnerability profile of India, so you should explain basics of geography. Geologically, India is very complex. Geologically, India is very complex because when Indian plate collided with the Eurasian plate, then the Himalayan mountains were formed. So it is formed when the Indian plate collided with the Eurasian plate. And this created the youngest fold mountain of an earth called as Himalayas. Himalayas, right? So you can simply show this. That's it. Indian plate, Eurasian plate, Eurasian plate. Right. So you have given some idea about geological reference. Then, according to National Disaster Management Authority, it has given that 59% of land of India is vulnerable for earthquake. Vulnerable for earthquake, 59%. Right. And Bureau of Indian Standard in the year 2002, it has classified the earthquake zones into 4 zones. Now, map is mandatory here because he has specifically asked about vulnerability. So, map and 4 zones you should give roughly, not detail. So, you can give the example. If you can show Himalayas, it is very simple. When you're drawing the map, you don't have to make in detail about that. Very simple, without having much fuss. So you can show this. This is zone 5, right? Then this portion as zone 5. Then you can show this area as zone 2, right? Then this is zone 4. And certain patches as zone 3. At least 2 zones you show them. So practice this map. Practice this map. They are very, very important. Practice this map in the context of disaster management, right? So given introduction, then you have given something about the main body. Then it talks about the salient features of major disaster caused by earthquake. Now you can give any 2 examples. Any 2 examples. And here he is asking about the Indian earthquakes. Indian earthquakes. So you can give an example of Himalayan earthquake, which was seen in 2023, and you can give the earthquake of Delhi. Anything, any part. So just explain about these parts. So introduction, main body, 2 examples. Now way forward. In the way forward, these earthquakes are not climate based, so we don't have any type of early warning system. And the best way to reduce the losses is to have preparedness, mitigate, rescue, monitoring, and relief measures. So hence Ministry of Earth Science has set up the National Centers for Seismology. Ministry of Earth Science has set up National Center for Seismology for monitoring of the earthquakes. And we are making effort to make more progress in that, like the launching of NISAR may give inputs in making more effectiveness or accuracy in earthquake disaster management. So this is how you have to write your way forward in that. So introduction, map, flowchart, way forward. Is that clear? And this all will be less than 150 words. 150 words, and that map is sufficient to complete your entire answer for that. Is that clear now? Earthquake and needed points. Now, next question is, account for the huge floodings of million cities in India, including the smart ones like Hyderabad, Pune, suggest the lasting remedial measures. This type of questions are very simple. Now here he is not asking about entire flood. He is asking about urban flood. Urban flood, right? So when you're writing your answers, first you should mention flood. Flood means submergence of a land or increase in the water level. increase in the water level of already submerged area, we refer that as a flood. And these type of incidents, when they take place in the urban areas, we refer that as urban floods. Now, he has not asked about any type of the zones, but you should be smart enough to give. As the incidents of urban floods are increasing in India, as the incidents of urban floods are increasing in India, a separate zone was created. A separate flood zone was created in the year 2007, which is referred as urban flood zone. Simple as it is, after Mumbai episode. After Mumbai episode. Because the reasons for the urban floods and their impacts are totally different. The reasons and impacts are totally different. So you should remember these things. Reasons and impacts are totally different. So hence we have created a separate flood zone for that. Right. Now he asks something. Account for the huge flooding of million cities. It means that he is asking reason for urban floods. So we are given the introduction. Now reasons are very simple. Reasons are very simple. So cloud burstings, and also we have given many reasons of that. So when you read that urban floods, you can put them in the form of charts. You can put them, right? So you can give something about what reasons are there, right? Now next is impact. After reasons, impact of urban floods. So please remember, we are talking about urban floods only. Impacts of urban floods. Other infrastructures are affected. Economic activities are hampered. All those you should mention, right? And you should mention that the density of urban area is more. So hence vulnerability and all are very, very high. So we have to give basic idea and these parts. If it is only floods, then you can draw the map. So here map is not required. Here the map is not required, but flow charts are very, very important here. Now, smart ones like Hyderabad and Pune. So when we talk about Hyderabad and Pune, they are not specifically to be right there. If you have any data about Pune floods or any Hyderabad, you can give an example of that, but not in detail about those. Not in detail about those. Now, suggest the remedial measures. Suggest the remedial measures. So remedial measures, when you say, right? So remedial measures. So it means they are talking about guidelines. Guidelines. And sometimes when you talk about, yes, reasons, you can give in point or in any way. It is your choice. You can give in the points or you can give anyways, no problem. But it should not be in a paragraph. Guidelines you can give. Then innovations you can show, like Sponge City. You can give innovation like Sponge City. And you can give an example of in Gujarat where you are using that as a pilot basis. So remedial measures you have to give. Suggest remedial measures, he's asking. What measures can be done? So we have talked about that. So remedial measures includes structural and non-structural measures in a simple way. So it talks about structural and non-structural measures. Right. So you have given an introduction, you have given the main body, and then you have given the remedial measures. Right. Now, next is way forward. So the moment when you're talking about way forward, now when we talk about the floodings are associated with the excess of water, and this excess of water is mainly because of climate change, global warming, either melting of glacier, rivers, heavy rainfall, cloud burstings, etc. All these reasons you have written. Now here you should mention because of the global warming and climate change. because of global warming and climate change, you have to give that its intensities and its frequency have been increased, and the rainfall patterns have also changed. Intensities, frequency, and pattern of rainfall has changed. Pattern of precipitation or rainfall has changed. This you should remember. Apart from that, apart from that, in certain areas, if we are having a proper coordination and effective early warning system, if we are having proper coordination and effective early warning system, effective early warning system, then we can reduce the impact of that. So this is how you have to make your answer more effective when you are writing. You have to make them introduction, main body, and then conclusion in that. This conclusion is to be valid one. Conclusion should be valid one. Then only you can write. Now, if any current affairs, if any new points are there, you can add them in the context of part. You can give your own opinion, and opinion, it is best if it is your own. Opinion will be best if you give your own, but they should not be superficial. They should not be superficial. They should be having some validations. Main body will include impacts and reasons. Perfect. They will be in that. Main body will have that. Introduction consists of definition and about that topic. If you don't know the definition, you can give something about that topic. Right. Now, vulnerability is essential element for defining disaster impacts and threat to the people. How and in what way can vulnerability to disasters can be characterized? Discuss different types of vulnerability in that. Right. Now, when we talk about the vulnerability profile and all, you have to first define vulnerability. That's why while defining vulnerability, I told that this is very, very important. So you have to define in detail what is vulnerability. So that is degree of resistance or inability to cope up or handle the conditions effectively. We refer that as the vulnerability, right? And this vulnerability, it varies significantly within communities. First you should define that. First you should define it is degree of resistance or inability to cope up or handle the situation by individual, country, environment. All those you should define. You have to write that part. Then you should talk about the further thing which can be its main body, where we say this vulnerability, it varies significantly. It varies significantly within the community and also with the time. Within the community and also with the time. So already you will have around more than 80 to 100 words here by explaining entire vulnerability and these parameters. Then next one is you should talk about the conditions, right? So what way the vulnerability disaster can be categorized? Conditions are categorized. So they can be physical, they can be economical, they can be political, etc. So those you should mention, right? Those you should mention. Then discuss different types of vulnerability with reference to disasters. So vulnerability means, you can take an example in the context of floods, the urban, rural, poor, rich, economic, budget, all those you should mention, right? So you should mention all those parameters. Yes, they are based on, yes, you can talk about all those senior citizens, children's are more vulnerable in that. So all those you should define, but you should have definition of vulnerability. You should define that community and time where it varies. Then conditions in detail. I have given that entire part. You should define that in a detailed part of that. Right. So when you talk about vulnerability, I have given that I have discussed half an hour in the first class. More than half an hour I discussed about vulnerability. So if you recollect all those points, that is more than sufficient in the context of your answers. So vulnerability is something which is very important. Now, when you are writing vulnerability in the way forward, you should link vulnerability with resistance. And vulnerability with something which is associated with the impact. If the capacity is high, if the capacity or resistance is high, then vulnerability will be less. So this you should write in the way forward. If we increase the capacity or resistance of individual, of a community, of a country, of a group, then it will have less vulnerability in the impact of the hazards. So hence there is inverse relationship between resistance and vulnerability. Higher the resistance, lower is the vulnerability. So that you should write in the way forward part. Can we give vulnerability in context of earthquakes? Yes, you can give. In the context of earthquakes also, injuries will be there. So the person who is old will be more vulnerable. The person who is young, they will be less vulnerable. In the context of earthquake, finance will also be there. So those people who have more money, so they will construct earthquake resistant buildings, but poor people will not be there. Medical facilities, in the context of earthquake, if serious injuries are there, if they are having money, then they can make arrangement. Poor people will not. So hence it is in all that vulnerability is in all. It may be climate based, it may be man, or it may be natural. So vulnerability remains the same thing. Is that clear? So that's what you should come out of the box and think. So what happens if the earthquake takes place in an area? Some people are very, very poor. So if the government assistance is not there, then they can't make their presence here. So hence you should be remembering these perspectives. It can be any type of disaster. So vulnerability has to be gauged in any type of disaster: earthquake, landslides, nuclear attack, any type attack. When we say vulnerability has to be gauged, and this vulnerability is based on these criteria. It is based on these criteria, that what type of people are there, where it has occurred, whether it is rich or poor. See, when we talk about earthquake in the Taiwan of 7.8 has killed less people. Why? Because resistant buildings are there. But if the same type of earthquake takes place in any poor countries where the resistant buildings are not there, the deaths will be more. So it means poor countries are more vulnerable in the context of disasters like earthquake, right? So if an earthquake takes place in the city, big city, then the deaths will be more. If the same earthquake takes place in the areas, in the rural areas, the deaths will be less. Even in the urban areas, the poor people will be more affected by that. So hence this vulnerability you should evaluate from your thought of mind. You should come out of the box, then the content will become easy. You should fix your mind first, that what type of vulnerabilities we are coming across: rich people, poor people, policies, budgets, healthy people or non-healthy people. Sometimes we come across the peoples like pregnant women will be there. So pregnant women will be more vulnerable in any type of disasters because of their conditions, right? So all these are referred as vulnerability. So vulnerability means it is inability to handle the situation effectively by individual. So this individual may be anybody. He can be old age, young age, healthy person. So we refer them as individual capacities. So hence you should be very careful when you are talking about these, right? So this is about vulnerability and how to make the impact on that, right? And that completes the disaster management. And also I made an effort as much as possible to give the content in very simplified words. So please remember the slide which I told, and also make sure that you are not missing the definitions of the disasters. There is very thin line of demarcation when you talk about the definition, like what is disaster. You should be very careful. What is hazard? You should be very careful about understanding vulnerability. You should be very careful in defining the risk. You should be very careful in defining capacity. You should be very careful in defining the crisis. So all these are very, very important in the context of your studies. I'm giving you all them. All these are what we refer them as mind maps. So before starting your disaster management, define and understand disaster, hazard, vulnerability, risk, crisis. Understand them. Make small notes on these. And then this becomes more interesting. Then when you're writing about any disaster, link that with your geography. Definitions about cyclone, definition about heat waves, definition about anything. So these definitions are very, very important. You should make the definitions of that. That will be introduction part. And then you should take the structural measure, non-structural measures, which I have explained in the context of the previous slides, right? So I have tried about what best can be done, right? So this is what you have to be remembering in the context of any type of disaster perspectives, right? So when you're reading, so please make references of these. Now if you're writing any answers, or anywhere where you're having any doubts, you can reach to me, and you can take the mail ID from the SME will provide you, but it should be valid in the context of your answers. You can reach to me. You can put your references only if they are very genuine, then I will revert back to that, right? About if any type of answers you have written, then I'll reach back to that. And if you are having any difficulty in that, don't hesitate. If they are valid, I'll revert back to that, right? But they should be with reference to your professional aspect of exams. Is that clear? So that concludes the disaster management to this batch. And hopefully, if there is any batch for ecology or geography, if it is placed for me, I'll be interacting with you. Or else, this will be the last interaction with you and me because of this batch perspective, right? So if any ecology or if any geography class is allocated, again we will meet it for the next time. Or else, take care. Don't get much stressed. These exams are beautiful exams. You don't have to make much stress. Don't get much stressed. You believe in yourself. You believe in yourself and work smart and hard. Apart from that, you have to develop a skill of writing. You need to innovate the methodology. Skills, how to write the answers using the maps, using the flow charts, using the examples. When you write 10, 15, 20 answers, then you will have the idea, not a single answers. If you write 20 answers, 30 answers, 50 answers in all subjects, then you will get one particular solution. It is something like this. You are having a stone, you have to do sculpturing of that. No person can create a best image in one shot. He will take 3 months. He will rough that. He will scrutinize that. Then only the best image is created. And that stone, that stone, if it is structured, sculptured very well, it becomes a deity which is worshipped in the temple. And the same tone, if it is not sculptured very well, it can be a footstep. So please understand how best you improve your content. That defines that. Just understand this. You have to work very well on that. You have to make that stone as such a point that it should be referred as a deity to be worshipped rather than a footstep. So it needs a strenuous effort, healthy effort, and always remember all these efforts can be done only when you are having patience. Patience. So this patience is key for creating that. So if any person who is creating a sculpture, he will dedicate 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, then only it can be done, or else it is technically not possible. Take an example of the the painting of Mona Lisa, which has been created by Leonardo da Vinci. Only to make the lips and eyes, he has taken 12 years. Understand the patience. And after that, it has become a miracle. Miracle. Nobody forget that. So you should have a patience, and you should always keep on continuously in your preparation. So don't get much stress. Believe in yourself. Don't convert yourself into overconfident. Quality is very important rather than quantity. Whether you are sitting for 4 hours, 3 hours, 2 hours, immaterial. Quality is important. And take care of your health. Read good books. Focus on good discussions. Keep your mind happy. Keep your environment happy and healthy, by which your moods will make you to have a good impact on your perspectives. And all the best. Take care of your life. And if possible, we'll meet up again. And all the best. Take care in your future endeavors and next aspirants as well. Goodbye. So you can reach to this mail ID, basavaraj.danoji@byju's.com. Take care.